July 7th, 1968, 11:00 a.m., Abyssinian Baptist Church, Harlem, New York. Over 2,000 people packed the sanctuary. Malcolm X's widow sat 3 rows back. Adam Clayton Powell stood near the pulpit. Representatives from 5 Italian crime families watched from the balcony. Every hustler, policy runner, and street soldier Bumpy Johnson ever protected filled that church. But everyone's eyes were locked on 2 women. They stood on opposite sides of the open casket, both leaning over Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's body, both with tears streaming, both believing they had the right to be there. On the left, Mayme Johnson, age 62, dressed in black. Bumpy's wife of 20 years. Her wedding ring caught the light from stained glass windows. On the right, a woman in a white dress, younger, beautiful, defiant. Her pearls, Bumpy's gift from 5 years ago, gleamed against her dark skin. The church had gone silent, 2,000 people holding their breath. Everyone in Harlem knew Mayme Johnson, but only the inner circle knew about the woman in white, and nobody expected both of them to show up. What happened in the next 15 minutes exposed Bumpy Johnson's double life. It revealed the impossible equation even the smartest strategist in Harlem couldn't solve. How do you give your whole heart to 2 different worlds? This is July 7th, 1968, the day Bumpy Johnson's 2 worlds collided at his final goodbye. Hit that subscribe button right now. These untold stories don't get told anywhere else. And drop your country or city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. New York to Nigeria, London to Los Angeles. Let me know. 13 hours earlier, July 6, 1968, 2:00 a.m., Bumpy Johnson collapsed at Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. He was playing checkers with Junie Bird when he grabbed his chest, tried to stand, fell. The man who'd survived 5 prison terms and 40 years in the deadliest business in America died of a heart attack at age 62, gone before the ambulance arrived. By 3:00 a.m., phone calls went out across the city. Frank Lucas got the call at his Riverside Drive apartment. Didn't believe it. Called 3 people to confirm. Then sat in his living room until sunrise, thinking about what came next. Mayme Johnson got the call at 3:15 a.m. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of preparing for this moment. But when Reverend Perkins called, she still broke down in her kitchen, unable to speak. By sunrise, everyone knew. By 9 a.m., people were gathering outside the funeral home on 145th Street. Over 2,000 people showed up. They lined up around the block. Old women brought grandchildren to see Harlem's protector one last time. Young hustlers wore their best suits. As Mayme prepared that morning, black dress, pearl necklace, checking her mirror, she had one thought. I survived him. I'm the widow. I'm the one who gets to mourn publicly. She had no idea who else had the same thought. Mayme didn't know about the woman in the Sugar Hill apartment, the woman who'd been getting calls from Bumpy 3 times a week for 15 years, the woman who knew things about Bumpy's business that Mayme never wanted to know. And that woman had just decided she was coming to the funeral. Helen Lawrenson, age 47, sharp cheekbones, eyes that missed nothing. She'd met Bumpy in 1953 at the Red Rooster. Bumpy was fresh out of prison, rebuilding his operation. Helen was working as a secretary for a Harlem property company, handling books for landlords who didn't ask questions. When Bumpy asked about a property on Lenox Avenue, Helen recited every tenant's name, rent amount, and payment history from memory. Perfect recall. Bumpy liked smart women. Helen understood money, understood discretion, and over time she understood Bumpy's business better than almost anyone. He set her up in a 3-bedroom apartment on Sugar Hill, 15 blocks from where Mayme lived. Visited 3, sometimes 4 times a week. But it wasn't just physical. Bumpy used Helen's apartment as his second office, where he met people Mayme could never know about. Helen kept records, tracked payments, knew which cops took envelopes, which Italian families respected boundaries, which young dealers were expanding without permission. She was his strategic partner in ways Mayme never could be, because Mayme had deliberately stayed separate from that world. For 15 years, Helen Lawrenson lived in the shadow. Never called his home, never showed up at legitimate businesses, never made a scene, until July 7th, 1968, when Helen got the call at 4:00 a.m. She sat in silence for 2 hours. By 9 o'clock a.m., she'd made her decision. She put on a white dress, not disrespect. White was traditional for some Southern funerals, but she knew what it would look like. A statement, a refusal to hide. She wore the pearls Bumpy gave her, the gold bracelet from Miami. She looked in the mirror. I loved him too. I have the right to say goodbye. At 10:45 a.m., Helen Lawrenson walked into Abyssinian Baptist Church. The whispers started immediately. Old Harlem residents recognized her. They'd seen her with Bumpy over the years. They'd known, but nobody talked. That was the code. But seeing her at the funeral in white wearing his gifts, that broke the code. An usher approached, suggested she sit in back, away from family. Helen looked at him calmly. I'm sitting in the third row. She walked down the center aisle like she owned it, sat directly behind where Mayme would be. When Mayme arrived 10 minutes later, escorted by Bumpy's daughter Margaret, she immediately felt something wrong. Then she saw Helen. Time stopped. Mayme's steps faltered. Margaret whispered, Mama, keep walking. Don't give them a show. But Mayme knew exactly who that woman was. Seeing her here, at Bumpy's funeral, sitting like she had every right, something inside Mayme cracked. Before the service, there was the viewing. Family would approach the casket first. Mayme approached from the left, the widow's side. Helen stood and approached from the right. Bumpy Johnson's two worlds collided. They stood on opposite sides, both looking down at Bumpy's face. He looked peaceful. Charcoal gray suit, white shirt, burgundy tie, hands folded. No expression. Mayme's hand gripped the casket edge. 22 inches of polished wood and one dead man separated them. Mayme spoke first, low but sharp. You have some nerve. Helen kept her eyes on Bumpy. I loved him too. You don't know what love cost me. Mayme's voice cracked. 20 years of standing by this man while he... She stopped, aware of 2,000 people watching. Helen looked up, met Mayme's eyes. You're right, I don't know what that cost you, but you don't know what it cost me either. 15 years of loving a man who could never say my name in public. 15 years of being erased. You got the wife title, got the truth. The truth? Mayme's jaw tightened. You got money and an apartment and gifts. I got the bills and the worry and the late nights. You got respect, Helen shot back. You got to be Mrs. Johnson. I got to be nobody. They were leaning over Bumpy now, harsh whispers carrying through the church. Behind them, Frank Lucas watched with calculation. Adam Clayton Powell shifted uncomfortably. Margaret gripped the pew. Mayme's hand moved closer to Bumpy's. Her wedding ring glinted. He married me. He trusted me, Helen said quietly, with things he never told you. That means something too. There it was. Two different kinds of intimacy, two different kinds of loyalty, two women who'd both sacrificed. Mayme knew about Bumpy's legitimate businesses, the community center, the families he helped with rent, the grandfather who played with kids on Sundays, the man who wanted respectability. Helen knew about the meetings with Italian families, which cops took envelopes, the territories and percentages, the threats and strategies, the man who kept Harlem stable by playing chess with real lives. Neither woman had the complete picture. Bumpy had compartmentalized so perfectly that no one knew all of him. Standing over his body, both women realized they'd each loved half a man. Even together, they'd never have the whole truth. Margaret appeared beside Mayme, hand on shoulder, a gentle reminder. People were watching. Mayme stepped back first. Didn't apologize. Didn't acknowledge Helen. She walked to her front row seat, spine straight, dignity intact. Helen stayed 10 more seconds. Touched Bumpy's hand briefly. I loved you, even though you were impossible. Then she walked to the third row. The church released a collective breath. The viewing continued, but everyone knew what they'd witnessed. The moment Bumpy Johnson's secret life stopped being secret. Put yourself in this situation. If you were Mayme, the legal wife, the woman who'd stood by Bumpy for 20 years, would you have confronted Helen? Would you have had her removed? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Frank Lucas sat in the fourth row, watching with intensity. At 38, Frank had been Bumpy's driver, bodyguard, and protege for 15 years. He'd learned from the best. Watching those two women taught Frank something Bumpy never said out loud. The cost of living divided. Frank remembered a conversation from 6 months earlier, January 1968, sitting in Bumpy's car outside Red Rooster. A young hotshot from Brooklyn was trying to expand into Harlem without asking. Frank asked, "You want me to handle it?" Bumpy shook his head. "Violence is easy. Control is hard." Then he went quiet. "You know the hardest part? It's keeping everything separate. Business from family, truth from protection. The person you are from the person you need to be." Frank hadn't understood. But sitting in that church, watching Mayme and Helen, he realized Bumpy was talking about something deeper. Bumpy had mastered territory, negotiations with Italian families, the balance between muscle and diplomacy. He'd kept Harlem stable for 40 years by being smarter than everyone. But he couldn't master his own heart. Frank watched the tension split the congregation. Older women, church ladies, they sided with Mayme, the wife, the proper one. Younger people, hustlers, some quietly respected Helen, the woman who knew the real Bumpy. Before Clayton Powell could speak, Margaret Johnson stood. Bumpy's daughter from his first marriage, before Mayme, before Helen, before this complexity. Margaret was 42. She'd watched her father balance violence and philanthropy, crime and community, love and business. She walked to the pulpit and asked to speak first. Clayton Powell nodded, relieved. What Margaret said next changed everything. Margaret looked at 2,000 faces. Mayme in front, tears streaming. Helen 3 rows back, hands folded. Frank Lucas watching. Street soldiers, community elders, politicians, mob representatives, all waiting to see which side she'd take. She took neither. She told the truth. My father was not a simple man. If you expected me to simplify him, to make him hero or villain, I can't. Ellsworth Johnson was more complicated than any story could contain. She paused. My father lived many lives. Husband, father, grandfather, protector, strategist who kept Harlem from tearing itself apart. A man who made choices, some good, some bad, most somewhere between. Mamie's shoulders shook. Helen sat perfectly still. My father believed in loyalty, but also in truth. He loved deeply. He loved complicated. He loved in ways that didn't fit neat categories. He loved this community enough to risk his life. He loved his family enough to shield us from darkness. And he loved imperfectly, like all humans. Margaret looked at Mayme, then Helen. There are people here who gave pieces of themselves to my father. People who loved him. People who knew different sides of a complex man. We dishonor his memory if we pretend only one kind of love matters. The church went quiet, not scandal silence, recognition silence. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson kept parts of his life separate because he thought that was protection. Maybe he was right, maybe wrong. But he's gone now, and we're all here together. All the different pieces of his life in one room. Maybe that's how it should be. She looked at the casket. Daddy, I hope you're at peace. I hope you don't have to keep anything separate anymore. Margaret's words gave everyone permission to mourn their own way, to acknowledge complexity without choosing sides. The procession to Woodlawn Cemetery included over 100 cars. People lined Harlem streets as the hearse passed. Old women wept. Young men stood with hands over hearts. At graveside, Mayme stood on one side, Helen on the other. As they lowered Bumpy's body, both women threw white roses. Mayme first, then Helen. Their roses landed side by side, indistinguishable. Their eyes met across the open grave. No words, no apology, just shared understanding. They'd both lost the same man in different ways. Both loved him. Both paid a price. Mayme turned and walked to the car. Didn't look back. Helen stayed until everyone left. Stood at the grave after they'd begun filling it. Until sunset. Until a worker told her they needed to close the gates. She walked away alone. No car. No family. Just a woman who'd loved a man she could never fully have. Saying a goodbye no one would acknowledge. 1 week later, July 14, 1968. Mayme sat in Bernard Katz's law office. Bumpy's lawyer read the will. She expected the house, businesses, bank accounts. Near the end, to Helen Lawrenson of Sugar Hill, I leave $50,000, paid quarterly over 2 years, plus continued rent on her apartment at 409 Edgecombe Avenue for 5 years. Mamie's face stayed neutral. Her hands tightened. After the meeting, she sat in her car for 20 minutes. Not angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of surprises. Tired of discovering new pieces after he was gone. Then something occurred to her. Bumpy had left her the name, the legacy, the respectability. Harlem Godfather's widow. That title would command respect, create opportunities. Mayme Johnson would be remembered. Helen got money and an apartment. Mayme got history. That week, Helen packed, kept Bumpy's books, first editions they discussed late into night, kept his letters, kept photographs no one else had seen. Evidence of a life lived in shadows, left behind furniture, jewelry, except the pearls, clothes. She wanted to start over. Helen moved to Philadelphia, got a job managing books, changed her number. Never returned to Harlem. Years later, someone who'd known her ran into her at a train station, asked if she remembered Bumpy Johnson. Helen smiled, sad, complicated, and said, "I remember a lot of people from back then. That was a different life." She never acknowledged their relationship publicly, never wrote a memoir, never told her side. The woman who knew Bumpy's secrets took them to her grave in 1987, age 66, in a Philadelphia nursing home. No obituary mentioned Harlem. Mayme lived until 2009, age 94. She wrote Harlem Godfather, the rap on my husband, and told her story her way. Shaped the narrative for a new generation. In her book, Mayme briefly acknowledged Bumpy had other women. One paragraph, no names. "I knew, but I stayed. That was my choice. I don't regret it." Frank Lucas took over and built an empire. But he violated Bumpy's rule, didn't keep his world separate, let criminal life and personal life mix. Within 5 years, Frank was caught, convicted, sentenced to 70 years. The funeral became Harlem legend. The two women, the collision. Some say Mayme and Helen eventually had a private conversation. Others say they never spoke again. The truth, like most truths about Bumpy Johnson, exists somewhere in between. Bumpy Johnson mastered territory, negotiations, strategy, power. Protected his community while profiting from its vices. Brilliant and ruthless and complex. But he couldn't solve the equation of his own heart. He couldn't figure out how to fully love two women without hurting both. Couldn't live in two worlds without eventually being forced to reconcile them. Thought separation was protection. Thought compartmentalization was kindness. Maybe it was. Maybe keeping Mayme from criminal life kept her safe. Maybe keeping Helen from public life protected her from scrutiny. Maybe he did the best he could. Or maybe Bumpy Johnson made the mistake powerful men have made throughout history. Thought he could control everything, including love. Thought he could manage relationships like he managed territory. Thought intelligence could overcome the human need for wholeness. At his funeral, July 7, 1968, his two worlds collided. Wife and mistress stood over his body, both grieving, both angry, both right. In that collision, everyone saw the truth. Even the strongest man couldn't live divided forever. The legend is about power and strategy, a black man who commanded respect in a white-dominated underworld. Intelligence over violence, protecting community while operating outside the law. But the human truth is about cost. The cost of keeping secrets. The cost paid by women who loved him. The cost of trying to be everything to everyone. The cost of never being fully known. Both women loved him authentically. Both sacrificed. Both were hurt. Neither was wrong. Neither deserved to be erased. That's the lesson of July 7th, 1968. Not that Bumpy was hero or villain. Not that Mayme was saint or Helen was homewrecker. But that real lives are complicated. That powerful people leave complicated legacies, that love doesn't fit neat categories, that even the smartest man in Harlem couldn't solve every equation. Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for 40 years, survived prison, assassination attempts, wars, built an empire, became a legend. But at his funeral, two women reminded everyone that legends are still human, that kings still answer to the heart, that no amount of power protects you from the consequences of loving divided. If you were Mayme, 20 years of marriage, the legal wife, would you have confronted Helen, had her removed, or done what Mayme did, acknowledge her presence without giving her power? Drop your answer in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. New York to Nigeria, London to Los Angeles, Chicago to Cape Town. Let me know where Bumpy's story is being heard. If this showed you history that textbooks don't teach, subscribe. Next time, what Frank Lucas did in the 48 hours after this funeral. The moves he made, the territories he claimed, the mistakes Bumpy would never have allowed. You don't want to miss it. Bumpy Johnson doesn't make threats. He makes calculated moves. Even in death, he taught everyone a lesson about the price of power and the cost of love.